Hi, this is Brian Green. This is the GE Healthcare IT Talks podcast. And I have with me today Chris Haffey from Amazon. And Chris, I'll let you introduce yourself and give us just a little bit about your background.
Sure. I am the worldwide public sector medical imaging business development manager here at AWS. And so I'm driving the growth of the business in the medical imaging industry worldwide here. And I bring to Amazon 25 years of experience in medical imaging industry, primarily on the R&D side. So I've actually built a large number of greenfield projects throughout my career. The Philips iSight packs, Vital Images, VitriaView, and Nucleus Health cloud packs. Yeah. I've also been very active in the open source community as well, building the Cornerstone JS project, as well as the DICOM Standards Committee.
You know, I think it's an understatement to say that you were involved in some greenfield development. And most people in their career develop maybe one or two successful products, but you've got 3 under your belt. So that's pretty impressive. Before we dive into this, just want to remind the audience, if you enjoy these topics, don't forget to like and subscribe. And you can see that in the links below. So one of the first things, so I'm going to start with Amazon because that's where you are currently. And I think that's one of the questions that a lot of people that I talk to in enterprise imaging, you know, there's a lot of questions about leveraging the cloud, but specific to AWS, a couple things. So first is we always get into this discussion when we're discussing moving things like storage into the cloud, the ROI on that storage, the cost of that storage. And I'm hoping you can give us some background on that and maybe your take on that. Because one of the challenges that I see is from customers that I talk to is how much is this going to cost and how do I estimate my costs? And people get really confused about all the different ways that you're billed for all these things that happen in the cloud, right? It's not just you're going to pay X amount per gig. There's all these other things that they have to worry about. So I wonder if you can get your thoughts on that. And maybe we could talk about that first.
Yeah, sure. And I think that when it comes to moving from an on-premise deployment to the cloud, the cost can be challenging to kind of figure out. And there's really kind of a couple of reasons for it. One is it's a different billing model. You're paid as you use the storage, and as opposed to a capital purchase. Mm-hmm. The other thing is Amazon has a very granular billing model, and so it's not just about buying, terabytes of storage and that's it. You end up being, we look at things like a number of HTTP requests or amount of data that's egressed. And I think that those two things, the kind of on-demand billing as well as the granularity, are really just largely unfamiliar for a lot of customers. Yeah. And what we've really, I think, it's not too dissimilar to when imaging transitioned from film to digital in the first place. We had the same questions, like, is it going to be fast enough? How much is it going to cost me on disc versus tape versus having it in film? And so when I say, it's pretty clear all of imaging is going to the cloud, and this is just a new thing that people need to become familiar with and invest in. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges I see also is when it comes to calculating it, they may not know how much they're egressing. That's a very, very common question. It's like, I don't know how much data I'm actually retrieving from my diagnostic workstation or for my clinicians within the enterprise. And so it is, I totally understand how it can be intimidating and overwhelming, but we do have good tools to help you figure that out. And it's just a matter of investing in and learning how it works. Yeah,
I think some people are just, it's an unknown, I think, for a lot of folks, right? And it's, they're kind of, there's a little consternation about this unknown of how much am I going to get charged? Because it's not a nice, clean quote that comes out that says, here's what you're going to pay per year, right? It's, but at the same time, what I tell people is, you can't tell somebody exactly what they're going to pay because you're only getting charged for exactly what you use. So if you were paying, I kind of, going back to Amazon, right? Amazon really kind of changed the world in online retailing because in the old days, you would pay for shipping on everything that you bought, but nobody really knew what the shipping was going to cost, so they would just charge you more, right? So you would pay $5 shipping fee, $5 shipping and handling. And Amazon came along and said, we're only going to charge you exactly what the shipping costs. So you're not paying any more than the exact cost of that shipping. And that really changed a lot. And to me, that's kind of what's happening with cloud, right? Because we're not, as a vendor, saying, just here's an estimate, this is what you're going to pay, but we're going to charge you more so it covers our potential losses. It's just, here's exactly what you used, here's exactly what you're going to pay for. Hope that makes sense.
It does. And, it's interesting because we're in this inflection point where there's a ton of interest and momentum of moving enterprise imaging to the cloud. And pricing, cost is one of the issues that we're continuously thinking about. And we do have, flexible pricing models. Mm-hmm. So some customers, they say, I really need a fixed budget. There's no way I can work around it. And we have ways of addressing that. But on the other side, I also think about it and say some of the problems that we run into in enterprise imaging really have to do with our lack of understanding of how our underlying resources are being used. I mean, how many times you run into a PAX deployment which is underperforming? The vendor says it's going to be this speed. You get it installed and you realize it's not getting those performance. You dig a little deeper and you realize that you bought the wrong hardware. Maybe because of the price point you're trying to get to, you undercut and didn't build out the system to be scalable enough. Maybe actually your needs change. That also happens. Imaging growth is happening all the time. And the system that you built 4 years ago may not be adequate to meet what your current needs are. One of the benefits of cloud is that those problems generally go away because all of this, the cloud is very scalable. You put that responsibility on AWS, who's very, very good at that. And it really kind of changes the dynamic. So some of the cost of the ROI calculation does come from really transitioning that to the vendor, to AWS, and not having to think about that as much because we do it so well. We do it for so many different industries. You can be confident that we're going to be able to meet your needs in that regard.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I just had a conversation the other day with someone who's planning on moving enterprise imaging to the cloud, to Amazon. And they said to me, Brian, all right, we're going to build these virtual machines in Amazon and stand everything up, but what are we going to do when the VM isn't powerful enough? How do we get more CPU, more RAM? And I said, well, that's the beauty of having your infrastructure in Amazon. There's no limit to any of that. You don't have to go into procurement and say we need more RAM or more CPU for our data center. You just go in the online, dashboard in Amazon and you say, okay, I want 4 gigs of RAM now instead of 2. And they say, well, what's the limit? I said, I don't really know that there is much of a limit. I mean, realistically there is, but, practically you're never going to use too much with Amazon. They're just going to charge you for it, right? So it's like limitless, right? It's just a different way of thinking, I think.
It is. And honestly, being in this industry for the last 25 years, limitations on deployment is something that takes up a ton of time. And I think cloud really changes the way we think about architecting, designing, and building systems. Because as a software developer, one of the things we had to deal with was what is our install base hardware footprint look like? When we go to do a new version, major version of software, you always want to add new features. Right. But sometimes doing that requires upgrades of the hardware. And then you get a situation where you can't do those new features because the install base doesn't have the hardware. And no one wants to go back to customers and ask, tell them they need to put a new virtual machine in or upgrade their hardware.
Right.
So I think, cloud will really, and honestly what that does is it slows down, progress. People end up on very old versions of software. They don't get all the features that they would like to have. And then I think the other thing too is you end up being restricted in terms of meeting your needs of your organization. So being able to add CPU, add memory as needed, as opposed to having to wait till your capital purchase runs its course and then you refresh, is really a game changer. And I think it's going to be really beneficial to clinicians once as we move to the cloud.
Yeah, and you mentioned something interesting there about the actual deployment of software in the cloud versus on-prem. You can build an entire environment in Amazon in minutes. Right? I can go into Amazon and in a few minutes, I've got a virtual network. I got 10 virtual machines. I've got an Active Directory server and storage and everything I need to do whatever I want. Just by clicking buttons, and it spins up these machines super fast. So I think that's another piece too, that deployments actually may be faster in the cloud to some extent.
Absolutely. I think that is one area that is, I would say, I can't wait for people to experience this firsthand.
Yeah.
Today, I think on-prem, you have your production system, you may have a dev and a test system, but those are usually not the same spec as your production system,
Sure.
right? So how many times you've been through an upgrade on your test system and then it seemed to work fine, you put it in production and boom, now performance has degraded a lot. I think when it comes to the cloud, you can automate all of that deployment and you can actually bring up a test system that is exact same specs as your production system. You can create automated testing to make sure that's still meeting the performance requirements. And then you can also, roll back software too. So, if the PAC system VNA is designed for that capability, if there is a problem, let's say worst case, you can actually create automation to flip it back to the prior system, instantaneously. And so that's another nice benefit of the cloud that is really hard to do on-prem.
Yeah, it's a lot more flexibility than when we're doing on-prem. The another piece that comes up periodically when I talk to folks about cloud is these different deployment models, right? People get confused when you use the term cloud because to some people, cloud means that my PAX is in the cloud and I'm paying a PAX vendor and they're managing it in the cloud. And to some people, cloud means that my infrastructure and my platforms are in the cloud. And I think where we're ending up as an industry is kind of a mix, right? I mean, some vendors have offerings where it's the entire PAX in the cloud. They manage it. So it's software as a service. And then there's platform as a service where, okay, I'm going to use Amazon's database. I'm going to use Amazon storage and I'm going to spin up a couple virtual machines. So what's your thoughts about that? Customers that are thinking about going to the cloud, I think they have to consider both models. What's Amazon's approach there? Are you partnering with vendors to provide these services or are you, what direction do you think Amazon is looking at here?
Well, we have, both really.
Yeah.
So we have vendors which are bringing out SaaS solutions and they are our customer. And so we sell to them and we help them build their systems to scale out for many, many customers and whatnot. Likewise, we also have customers that are health systems. And those customers want to be able to deploy their PAX and VNA in their own account. And so I don't know if there's a really good name for it, but we like to call it bring your own account, or BYOA, to kind of compete or contrast with SaaS. And both are completely legitimate models that have pros and cons to them. On the SaaS side, I think what we're seeing is strong interest in being able to basically transfer responsibility for a lot of aspects of running the clinical PACS to the vendors, such as security and uptime and upgrades and scalability. And I think some customers have really struggled with those things in the past or want to really kind of think less about that and focus on other, maybe more challenging problems or more with more upside. SaaS is a great model, and I think that's you're going to see a lot of success in it. On the bring your own account side, I think that there's also other pros and cons. First of all, you keep all of that responsibility, and if you're good at it and you have staff that really wants to, and you think you can handle that, you can get a lot of benefits in terms of lower costs because for a SaaS vendor to take on those responsibilities, they're going to charge you, to take on the security aspects of something that's really important, and there's a cost to that. And I think also bring your own account. You can take advantage of bundled pricing from AWS. Maybe you have your EMR there as well as other clinical systems.
This other stuff.
You start getting bigger discounts on from AWS when the more you run there. And I think the big thing is just the control. You can really do a lot more with your system and to bring your own account than what you'd probably be able to get from a SaaS vendor because they're really going to target the majority of the market, and you may not be in that majority market. You may be on one end or the other, and so a bring your own account allows you to customize it specifically for how you want it to be.
That makes sense. So it's and certainly there's a hybrid possibility, right? Like we're, okay, my EMR is in the cloud, I'm using it as infrastructure, but my PACS vendor has a SaaS offering, and maybe for whatever reason it makes more sense to do that financially, or it's more predictable cost, or something like that. So I can certainly see that. And I've even seen some customers that are in multiple cloud providers, right? They're like, okay, we're going to leverage Amazon for whatever we can, but maybe there's some solutions that our vendor is only going to let us put it in Azure for some reason, right? So we have some stuff sitting over there, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether it's some infrastructures in one platform or another. I think it seems to work fine. Another piece that I wanted to talk about is the massive amount of data that imaging has, right? You know, when I talk to customers, when they look at the data utilization across their health system, medical imaging, you know, radiology is always the biggest consumer of data, right? And that's one of the reasons I think they're the last ones to really kind of jump into cloud, because we talked about pricing models already, and I think that's an important discussion. But then the second concern that comes up is performance in the cloud. And what types of technologies and tools do vendors like Amazon have that can ensure that the performance that we need for this massive amount of data that's going back and forth between the cloud and on-prem is going to work for our radiologists and our clinicians and so forth. So I was wondering if you could comment on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, you know, performance is probably one of the most challenging things as a software developer or as a PACS administrator to ensure that you're delivering on a consistent basis. And I think when you look at a big shift from moving data from on-prem to cloud, it's natural to wonder and even expect that maybe the performance will be impacted in a negative way. Mm-hmm. And honestly, if you look at where we've been, it has been an issue to meet the performance requirements for diagnostic interpretation in the cloud historically, but really those have gone away mainly due to technology advances. Today, if you think about internet connections that are available in the U.S. and in many places, major cities, and I'm over a gigabit connection right now from home. Yeah. And so if you go back 10 years ago, I was lucky to have a 50 megabit connection, right? And so I think initially when we tried initial experiments with moving enterprise imaging to the cloud, that network was a real issue. Yeah. And today it's largely gone. Gigabit is very fast for home. Yeah. And not only that, but AWS has technology, AWS Direct Connect, which is a dedicated network connection between your on-prem network and an AWS region. And it's 100 gigabit, up to 100 gigabit speeds, and it can be very, very low latency, like less than 10 milliseconds. Yeah. So I would guess that that's over fiber, but yeah, I think that's something that I think just came out this year, the 100 gigabit connection. And we think about a large healthcare system today, they'll have similar circuits connecting all of their major hospitals and regions, and they're doing enterprise imaging there. Yeah. So I think it's natural to think about an AWS region as an extension of your enterprise network over that type of connection, and that is really, we're seeing a lot of success with existing products in a lift and shift model, just moving them straight into AWS and still having as good or better performance than what they're seeing on. And
this concept isn't foreign, I think, to most people in the IT world in healthcare, because our larger health systems have been using other data centers that are not in the hospital already, right? I mean, it's pretty common, so it should be fine. I have that conversation with people sometimes, kind of like what you just said, right? You have this network already. In some cases, it may actually be even faster on Amazon, because like you said, with the the direct connect to Amazon. In fact, I've talked to customers that have told me that sometimes they see significant performance increase for sites that are further away because they're both connecting to Amazon through independent points of connection, and once it's inside that network, it's much faster, right? So if you had a hospital in California, a hospital in New Jersey, for example, both all in Amazon as an example, it may be faster than having your own VPN to data centers between those two facilities.
Oh yeah, definitely. VPNs are notorious for adding, reducing bandwidth, actually having bandwidth caps depending upon which VPN technology you're using, and also adding latency. And so, I think the way to think about it is that AWS has an extremely fast backbone that connects all of our regions and local zones and points of presence. Yeah. And so when you actually use AWS, like exclusively, for example, so maybe you have some VMs or some part of your packs running on the East Coast and some on the West Coast, when those connect to each other, they go over the AWS backbone, which is extremely high bandwidth and extremely low latency. and as opposed to over the internet via some
much
VPN.
faster than we could do on our own with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, that applies, I think as we become more of a distributed environment, as health systems span, geographically, as, the new trend is having radiologists working from home. And so they may not even be near the hospital. They can be across the country. And being able to take advantage of that fast AWS backbone is something that a lot of customers are really excited about and seeing great benefit from.
Yeah. And continue on this theme of massive amounts of data. Kind of an interesting side effect of having all your data in, say, S3 buckets in Amazon might be that for research, right? All these tool sets that AI toolkits, for example, these tools that Amazon has to work with your data, it has to get to Amazon first before you can use it. Well, if your data is already sitting in Amazon, right, then it's already there, right? Have you heard of any healthcare institutions with enterprise imaging in the cloud starting to leverage those research tools?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think AWS has, the most expansive and functional AI tools. And we see a ton of activity specifically in the research space with medical imaging. And I think you're seeing a large number of benefits that cloud brings to AI in particular. So, one is having the scalable storage and compute. Customers have tried to do AI on-prem, and they always run into problems where they, getting expensive storage to support massive, continuous training loads is really expensive and hard to do. The clinical PACS is often, overloaded, and you have to basically pull data, off hours because you don't want to impact the clinical workload. And so, moving into a scalable cloud storage like S3, you don't have to worry about that because you can, it's a huge amount of bandwidth that you can pull out of S3 to support training and other analytical workloads. I mean, compute is the other thing. If you think about where AI is going in particular, we're really in the infancy, right? I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see a massive amount of training going on against data. And to put the amount of compute that you would need to support that training on-prem is not really feasible. I mean, it's really, the future of radiology and AI is really cloud-based. It has to go there just due to the scalable storage and compute. And then, of course, the tools that make it so much easier to take that data, leverage that compute to accelerate the whole pipeline for training and inference.
Yeah. Okay. What would you say to folks that are trying to do this and they're worried about compatibility with their software in the cloud, right? They're worried that maybe my PACS vendor isn't going to support Amazon or they're not going to support Azure or something like that, right? I mean, people ask me that all the time. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and what I'd say is that the industry has been, it's been mixed. There's some vendors that have added support for Amazon for quite a while, AWS, and others that have been reluctant. I think today it's really everyone is on board with cloud in the vendor community. Yeah. I mean, customers have been asking for it. They see successes with other hospitals. They want to, there's demands now to shut down their data centers, do not grow your data center footprint. And so they have to find a solution. And so I think vendors that have not, there's very few of them, but anyone that hasn't jumped on the cloud bandwagon and provided a way for their customers to deploy there is really going to be hurting now because that's what the RFPs are requiring. They say we need cloud solution or you need a path to get there very soon.
Yeah. One last thing that has been brought to, has been brought up as a concern when I talk to customers about going to cloud. There's really no reason not to do it. We just covered all these reasons that, it makes sense to go to the cloud. The last thing that they'll say is, what about availability? What if my, what if a backhoe takes out my internet connection, outside the hospital and I'm a level 1 trauma center? Now what, right? So what advice would you give those people that are concerned about that?
Sure. Well, redundant internet connections. I think most, one thing to ask is, how often have you had, or when was the last time you had an internet disruption? And, I think I'd say, especially with the pandemic, so many things went virtual and so many things went cloud. With that came additional redundant network connections. And so I'd say that today, the typical healthcare organization has multiple redundant connections, and they're going to be adding more.
Yeah.
So specifically for that reason, because it does happen,
Yes.
right? And you do need to have multiple redundant connections to safeguard against that.
Yeah. So multiple redundant connections is the answer. Well, it's been a pleasure. I think we're just about out of time. So thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I enjoyed the discussion.